spent most of my career in technology. The bulk of my career was based in was hospital information systems on a large scale. I was one of the lead software architects for the VA hospital, the Decentralized Hospital Information System, DHCP, and the Department of Defense Composite Healthcare System, CHCS. So those are both very large-scale hospital architectures, software architectures, and so my role was mostly working with the kernel software and the early stages of the system, and watching very simple ideas blossom into very large-scale systems.
We're asking people about what they think is going to happen in the future. Just in general, what do you see?
Well, I guess it's Alan Kay. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. So, I guess my thoughts are to try to invent things. My particular passion is using technology to make the world a better place, and I've kind of went through a life change experience when I turned 50 and decided to get into philanthropic and humanitarian applications of technology. So that's been my focus. So I rather than calling it philanthropy, which has the misinterpretation of rich people writing checks to poor people, philanthropy actually means love of humanity in the technical terms, I guess. I call it better world activities. How do you make the world a better place? Which can be business opportunities, fair trade opportunities. It can be micro-development loans to give women loans to buy a sewing machine. It can be cash donations, but there can be many, many different patterns of uplift, I call them. And only a small portion of that is actually a monetary gift. So I've been looking at ways of using the technology and what we're learning from networks and connectivity for better world activities. And so what I see happening is that we learn more and more how to make the world a better place through the network effect. And things like a Google or an eBay or an Amazon that suddenly went from very small scale operations to huge global impact. Same thing could happen with some better world activities, that something out there that we might not see as a very big activity today could cascade and become, the next big thing, but it'd be focusing on humanitarian uplift, if you will.
Best case scenario, what do you see being created that's going to make the world better?
Well, I have a thing called Very Large Scale Uplift, VLSU, kind of modeled after VLSI, Very Large Scale Integration. And it's based on this notion of, I think they called it fine-grained distributed systems yesterday, of having a lot of very small scale better world opportunities, but used by a very large number of people. So we have 6 billion people in the world, all of whom could be doing something to make the world a better place, and all of whom would benefit from having done that. So there's this virtuous circle potential of enormous magnitude if you can figure out how to do that. And so the conditions I see for that are to have more and more people involved in lower threshold scale of activity. So the smaller the thing you can do to have greater connectivity, greater impact on the world, scaled up to more and more people. So you have this multiplicative effect, and you have an exponential growth of good things. So that's the VLSU model. It's not too far removed from what Google and eBay are doing today. eBay is organized around the notion of an auction and a reputation system, 150 million people or something like that in the space. And but the auction is the condensing point, if you will, of the activity. In a better world cascading effect, it would be these better world opportunities. There's this thing, we want to send blankets to the hurricane victims or something like that. So you have, instead of an auction, you have, I'll call it a transformation as an abstract term. But a transformation is it's a longer term process that has a goal, and maybe it might not be reversible. You teach somebody to read, and you can't undo the reading or literacy. So the people who get involved in this better world opportunity or activity would would do the project. If they complete it, if the people do what they say they're going to do when they start out, they get a reputation like you get on eBay. And you can have this network effect based on reputation and trust, based on a whole lot of little things happening around the world. And then you take the Google side of this would be to discover what's working and what are the patterns of uplift, what is working in the world, how do you how do you find these things, and then how do you do more of it? So if you have this long tail of the distribution and a power law distribution, I'm presuming the audience can understand this without explaining it. So it's a power law distribution where you have a long tail of a lot of random chaotic activities, supposedly, of people just trying things and acting according to their instincts, if you will. And then you find the things that are a little bit more uplifting than the others, that the things that are working out there, you discover that through the reputation system, through people intentionally paying attention to something. So to pay attention is one of the better world tools that I'm looking at. So it'd be kind of a tagging mechanism, or I call them uplift magnets in my prototypical architecture I'm thinking about here. But people could pay attention to these things, which elevates them out of the chaotic Brownian motion out there, and kind of ratchets them up a little bit higher. And in physics, it's called a Brownian ratchet motor. And you have just a slight differential resistance to one direction over the other. So if you have just the slightest discriminator that says this is a better idea than that, or this better world thing is a little bit better, it ratchets up. So that kind of elevates it from the Brownian motion chaotic level to another level of attention, which might be enough to actually cascade this good idea into better things. Philanthropy groups, or people who have the resources, could then go into what I call the amplification stage of finding that opportunity and then amplifying it through resources. So, geez, this is a good idea, they need $1 million, bam, it's a better idea. Or if it doesn't work, then it doesn't do it. So that was this process of cascading. So you go from the huge number of small-scale activities to the slightly ratcheted up ones to the amplified thing to something that's very large and scaled. And this can happen a whole lot faster than your traditional hierarchical development methodologies. And it also requires intense feedback of knowing what's working, and in fact, the feedback may be more important than the activity, which was one of the lessons I learned yesterday at the sessions about the intense degree of feedback that Google uses for its learning, spell checkers being done by user feedback rather than dictionaries, language translation done through statistical methods. So the idea of having a very intense feedback model, of having this probably reputation-based model of saying this was a good idea, people thought this was a good idea, and scale it up there. So, am I answering your question?
What needs to happen to make a process like you described happen?
Well, I was active with Tim Berners-Lee in the early days of the web. I went to the first W3C consortium and spent a lot of time talking to Tim and what he was doing, and his notions of decentralization and scale, and learned a lot from what he did there. And in his book, he has a quote I can't say quite literally, but he said something: people don't recognize how simple the web was when it started. The web was HTTP, URLs or URIs, and HTML, and nothing more. So he didn't go to a blue ribbon panel and say, how should we organize the web? He didn't ask UN for permission to create the World Wide Web. He just created these very simple initial conditions that fueled themselves to become the web. He didn't try to build a search engine or the Dewey Decimal System, so physics was websites 1 to 100 and chemistry 200 to 300. Just created this chaotic mess of URLs, and search engines emerged, and they got better over time, and today we have Google, tomorrow we might have something else. But what he did is, I call it the coffee cup diagram. He started out with these simple initial conditions, and then he put it within the constraint of Internet Protocol, IP. So he could have gone to AOL or CompuServe or Prodigy and saying, hey, could I have some space on your computers to do my Tim's Web? But no, he went to the IP world and the open Internet Protocol world, but the closure that he imposed on the web by making it IP dependent is what made it open. So good fences make good neighbors type of thing. So the constraints you put on your initial conditions are critical to the what I'll call an autocatalytic effect from those initial conditions. So I think it turns out it was a very wise thing to do, is use IP. And in terms of an evolutionary process of starting very simply and letting it grow over time, consumer attention was the fitness function. So sites that people paid attention to grew and thrived on the web. So that's kind of my meta model of the web. I call this an autocatalytic space. And this autocatalytic space has the property, as you add stuff to it, it gets bigger. So entropic space is what we normally see at a shopping center. So if Barnes & Noble comes in and uses up a shopping center space, it goes away. You can't use it for a Starbucks. Amazon comes on the web and made the web bigger. It didn't use up the web. There was no loss of capacity, in fact, make it bigger. So the sense of people piling onto the web to make it bigger, which the network effect and all this other stuff that we're looking here at this Accelerating Change Conference, very, very potent stuff. In philanthropy, humanitarian activities, there's this kind of a mindset that we have too many problems and not enough money. So what are our worst problems? How much money do we have? We can only fund the top 10, number 11 through 500 are out to lunch. The autocatalytic model says is that we have a virtuous circle, that the more you do good things, the more good things will happen. And sometimes it takes money, sometimes it doesn't. But I'm not starting from the standpoint of we don't have enough money. I'm starting, we don't have enough connectivity, we don't have enough understanding, we don't have enough meaningfulness in what we're doing. And if you look at what happened just recently in Hurricane Katrina, there was probably about 60 sites that tried to do people finders for locating families. So very, very good intentioned people that wanted to do something, but we ended up with 60 incompatible sites that didn't connect in any way. The Red Cross website for doing that was, I think, really quite poor and amateur production. So the technology, the best technology came from one of those smaller sites, but the connectivity wasn't there. So creating a space within which the good things can exist and cooperate and connect with, I think is critical. So the meta model that Tim used on creating the web, I think, is what needs to be done for a better world, an autocatalytic space, figuring out what's working, doing more of it, getting more people in there. More things to make the world a better place don't have to displace other things to make the world a better place. In fact, they feed back in this virtuous circle. The traditional model, I've been very influenced by David Cooperrider in his world of appreciative inquiry and Martin Seligman and positive psychology, and also what I call the positive flip of looking at what's working and how do you do more of it. And I use the metaphor of toasters and cats for this. The toaster is a system where the whole toaster is equal to the sum of the parts of the toaster. You fix what's wrong with the toaster and you make the toaster whole again. A cat is a different level of complexity. If you have a dissected cat, it's a fundamentally different thing than a live cat. You can't fix what's wrong with a dead cat to make it a whole cat anymore. The cat is also resilient. If the toaster loses its cord, it's no longer a functioning toaster. If the cat loses its tail, it's still a cat. It can lose an eye, a paw, an ear, or whatever. So cats have this resiliency and adaptability to them. So understanding the whole cat and how it lives and thrives and reproduces and behaves is a fundamentally different knowledge than understanding the dead cat and how it's dissected. So when we have systems with emergent properties, that you can't get to the whole from the sum of the parts anymore. So my theory here is that we have an increasingly cat-like problems that we're facing in the world, but we're stuck with toaster-like metrics. So we have a very linear accounting system. So we think of accounting problems in transactional analysis. So understanding and having a language to talk about what's working, I call it positive discourse. Martin Seligman has been a pioneer in that in psychology, and he's got a book called Character Strengths and Virtues instead of DSM, the Diagnostic Standards Manual. Medicine in general has 1.2 million terms for how to be sick. UMLS, it's called. Has virtually nothing to talk about how to be well or healthy or thrive. So we don't have a way of talking about human resilience in the same sense we have a way of talking about all the diseases. So in our genomic and proteomic research, we're looking for what's wrong and how to fix it. We're not looking for the resilience gene. And people who find the resilience gene aren't going to make money having a drug for, well, maybe they are, but we have this split in our ways of knowing, which I call malgnosis and benignosis. Malgnosis is a way of knowing by what's wrong, and benignosis is a way of knowing what's positive and working. So benignosis is the live cat knowledge, and malgnosis is the dead cat knowledge. And so the overwhelming trend is to, when we move from toasters to cat-like thinking, is to carry through the malgnostic understanding. How does the cat fail? How do we fix it? And so we have this model in the world of, we can make the world a better place by fixing all of its problems. So what are its problems? We'll list them all and pay for them all. That, to me, is a vicious circle. In fractal theory, they call it the devil's staircase. It's a curve that the more you look at it, the more steps you have in it. The flip side of it, which comes out of this positive discourse, is what's working, how do we do more of it? It's not denying that there's problems, but is saying that you can work with things from a sense of resiliency. So for Katrina, the hurricane, you'd say, well, what's the community resiliency that we can use to rebuild with? Rather than what are the victims, how much does it cost, and why isn't Washington sending them more money? Now, obviously we need to spend money, but if you do it from a point of resiliency, of what's working, how to do more of it, it's a fundamentally different problem than fixing all the problems. So fixing all the problems in Katrina isn't going to make New Orleans a better place. That's one of the lessons here. So starting off with this form of discourse that we're systematically looking for what's working and how to do more of it, I think is a very critical point of it. Creating an autocatalytic space, the Amazon approach versus the shopping center approach, so that the more people who pile on, the more it happens, the way it goes. So the space fuels itself, good things trigger more good things, and more people discover these things are happening, and it just feeds on itself in the same way as the web took off with very little initial conditions. So I can't say I have the specific ideas there. I'm still thinking this all through, and it's one of the reasons I'm here at this conference. But I think some of the things that I've discovered really are reputation and trust are a key part of this space. That the ability to trust someone at the other end of a network according to some community standards, that if I send these books to this school in Jamaica, that they'll really get there and it's not a ripoff, or it's not a Viagra salesman coming at me. So trust is one of the, what I'll call intrinsics of the space. Identity is another one, of knowing who you're doing with and having a persistent identity so that across multiple transactions or transformations or activities, this really is Juan Gonzalez in Guatemala. So identity is another part of it. And if you take Tim's original model for the web, URLs was identity, HTTP was connectivity, and HTML was this relationship or formatting. So identity, connectivity, and relationship is what you could call his initial conditions. So identity is there. There's movements there. Identity Commons was here at this group. Obviously, there's no end of identity schemes out there. Connectivity, the web is certainly, and cell phones and SMS, and there's connectivity is there, but it's a little too open. It doesn't have the constraints that Tim used for IP on the web. So it's the Katrina activities were so open that they didn't have this sense of closure to be able to find your neighbors. So you get this one by having a closed space or a walled garden that you work within, or you could have a Google-like referential model that would find these things through Google Magic, whatever they're using. So you could tag things, you could have some set of conventions. And I think that the tagging phenomena, folksonomy, the kind of the adaptive ontologies that I see coming there that's primordial soup for this. I don't think we have the solution for it out of it yet. And then the relationship model of how do you connect all these things, and this sense of transformation of figuring out what's working and doing more. So it's kind of the verb in the language, if you will. I haven't figured that out yet either. I've played with a thing called philanthropic markup language to tagging that kind of stuff. It doesn't quite work for me right now. It's a work in progress. I'm happy to get other people that can think these things through with me. The constraints on it, the IP constraint on this better world space or autocatalytic space is another issue of legality, the whole ethics on the internet type of stuff. Homeland Security has all kinds of interesting new twists on what you can do to help the world now, and you don't want to help those terrorists, which obviously you don't, but the interpretation of that can be pretty draconian sometimes. And so just setting up a system to send money around the world for philanthropic causes is a little more complicated due to that. The fitness function is another thing, and that's a topic that I've seen here is people talk about good and bad a lot. This is a good network, this is a bad future, whatever. It seems to me, well, first of all, good and evil have been discussed for quite a few millennia right now. But in terms of the singularity or the accelerating change model, our ethics of just what is good changes. And there's some ethical issues there that I haven't resolved. One of my reactions to this particular group and its artificial intelligence orientation is it's a little bit focused on that, and the intrinsic or the driving force behind the singularity is going to be artificial intelligence. I'm not convinced that that's really the true thing. If you go back and look at any of the historical or classical or religious writings, love is a far more powerful intrinsic, I think, than artificial intelligence. And so I think there may be other human virtues that would drive the singularity rather than the technological focus that I see here. And that's not to say that they don't both exist, but so basically the fitness function in this autocatalytic space, the evolutionary space, would be the human virtues. And you go back all the way to Aristotle and what he called the good life, or eudaimonia. And it's not really rocket science. I think the love, peace, joy, happiness, how you feel when you look at a baby who's got a clean diaper and it's not going to be on a plane with you, that emotional response of looking at your species as your younger generation, and that sense of, I call it the baby in room phenomenon. If we had a room full of people and a baby walked in, or somebody walked in with a baby, people's voices would go up. They'd want to chuck the baby. You want to have eye contact with the baby. Those emotions that are aroused around a baby, I think, are some of the more primordial emotional experiences that would be the driving force, I think, behind the fitness function of a radical change or transformation in society. So that whole idea is wrapping up into very large-scale uplift and VLSU. It's still a thought experiment. I'm working with the Omidyar network. Pierre Omidyar started eBay and is trying to take the community aspects of eBay into humanitarian activities. I worked with Stanford's Digital Vision program. I was a fellow here a couple of years ago, and specifically to look at better world activities, and started a group called Giving Space. It's kind of a think tank for workshops for these things. One other aspect of all this, and looking at how the web started out, I worked with John Postel in my early days in the VA designing the mail system. And John, I think, is one of the underappreciated visionaries behind the internet. He's passed away a few years ago, but he really had the vision, I think, for a lot of the protocols and the foundations behind the internet that allowed the network effect to take place. And I think we're seeing the same situation with the end-to-end principle in the internet of through Ma Bell, when he was designing the network, had the smart center of the network that you go to Ma Bell and it'll take care of your message. And so smart center, dumb peripheral. So you had a touch tone phone and all the smarts were in the network. John Postel and others in the end-to-end principle. I'm probably not naming all the originators of it, but John was the one that got me started on it. The intelligence is on the edge of the network, and the network itself is just an efficient packet transmission network. So you don't care if you're sending a music or a fax or an email. That analogy applies to the humanitarian development world. For example, what's happening in Africa, we have a smart center dumb edge design for helping people in Africa, which has the effect of increasing their dependency on the process, so that people become more dependent on the agencies and the aid and things like that, and less able to be resilient on their own accord. And you couple that with what's going on with AIDS and the other political chaos, and it's a real mess. So Africa is the smart center model, and the VLSU model, if you want to call it that, is a smart edges model. So you have smarter and smarter edges of people who are connected in their better world opportunities, and the network is just this thin transmission medium connecting people and managing the reputation. So the network itself is not where the intelligence lies. It's pushed outward. So there's a lot of knowledge banks that you see running around on the network, World Bank or whatever, But these knowledge banks are really this centralized smart center model of well, let's put this knowledge over here in this corner. The actual deployment of the knowledge in working groups, and this comes from the community of practice model of organizational learning, if you want to call it that, is the knowledge is in the doing and the communities who are doing the work. So pushing that outbound to the edges of the network, and conceiving of a network that is this connecting space. So is I think critical. And so again, it comes back to creating this space, even as small as it doesn't have to be a big space, but it has to be scalable. It has to be capable of getting larger, and getting more and more people involved is the key thing. So another analogy I use is the conversion from the mini computer era to the microcomputer era. So the mini computers in the 70s and 80s were vertically integrated. So Digital, Hewlett-Packard, Wang, Prime, Tandem, whatever, had their own operating systems, hardware, disk drives, vertically integrated. And you bought the whole package. You couldn't use the digital operating system on a Tandem machine. The mini computer era came along, and you had these layers. So the Intel did the microcomputers, Microsoft did the software, Seagate did the disk drives. So you had this kind of a stack, a protocol stack, if you will, of the computer industry, and people could focus on what part of the industry they want to work on. Philanthropy or humanitarian world today is the stovepipe model. It's the mini computer era of 1.4 million nonprofits in the United States alone, 275,000 NGOs working in Brazil. All of these have an executive director, or should have a financial officer, have the whole stack of activities that they need to go through. So today, if you wanted to go do something on any scale, you need to start a nonprofit and go through the whole thing. And then people talk about capacity building. We don't have enough management capacity to manage all this. Well, do we need 1.4 million CFOs, 1.4 million executive directors? Or is there an alternative way to structure this so you have this layered approach? So you'd have an infrastructure model where people could focus on their layer of whatever they want to do. So of particular interest to me is this people who have this do something instinct. We saw this after 9/11, after Katrina, after the tsunami. People want to do something. They have a very strong motivation to go out and do something in response to seeing something terrible happening. So if you give them a layer in this protocol stack, and if you organize philanthropy or humanitarian work as a microcomputer model rather than the mini computer model, they could go there and they could say, hey, I want to send books to Jamaica. So bam, connect with somebody over there, and they're sending books to Jamaica and feeling like they've accomplished something. The current model is, well, we'll just send money to the Red Cross and presume that they're going to do something good with it. But you don't get the same, I'll call it transformational energy back. I didn't really help those kids in Jamaica by sending money to the Red Cross. I helped the Red Cross. But if you have a greater connection and you have this greater sense of participation and feedback and this sense of, wow, I really did help somebody, that would fuel itself. You wouldn't have people calling you at dinner time saying, please send more money. You say, geez. So for 50 cents, you can save a baby's life through an oral rehydration solution. Well, if you could save a baby's life with 50 cents, you'd probably want to spend $1 next time. 2 cents vitamin A tablet will restore blindness, sight from a blindness kid in South Asia. Amazingly tiny things could have huge effects. And if you gave $1 and you had 50 kids who could see because of your dollar and they thanked you for it, you wouldn't have the same dynamics that we have today about the fundraising thing. This also allows for greater diversity, and one of the things you notice is you have fad philanthropy. The tsunami hits and suddenly everybody's sending money to the tsunami and hurricane. Now we're in a hurricane. Niger was hot on the top 40 list or top 10 list before the hurricane. Kids are starving in Niger, and we've kind of lost track of that because of the New Orleans situation. There's a whole lot of need and suffering out there that is continuous and below the radar screen of the media. So what we see right now is we're just paying attention to the most mediagenic misery on the TV set, and whatever's hot gets all the money. Whether they need it all or not is another issue, or whether they need it in one spike or one continuous stream over 10 years. So we don't have a way of diffusing the spotlight effect, I call it. So we have this mass media model of putting all of our attention on one thing, and that kind of is the one fad of the moment. But I think we need a stronger diffusion model of taking this energy and attention and diffusing it over a much broader area. HIV/AIDS, for example, is a huge problem, but it's just kind of in the background. It's in the noise level, and one starving kid someplace gets the attention. But something that's kind of chronic and huge and too big for a soundbite just can't make it to the spotlight. So that's one of the problems that I think we need to resolve on the network effect. So what's this? That's the paying attention tool, which I understand is an artificial intelligence problem of what does a program pay attention to. And I resolve that in my mind, at least my current level of thinking, through intense feedback. And one of the lessons I saw yesterday on the sessions was somebody saying that the optic nerves leading from the brain to the eye were 10 times the capacity from the eye to the brain, saying that the brain was actively conditioning the neural network to see things. So if you see ink blobs, they're going to turn into a face because the brain is looking for a face. But the brain is a very active participant in the vision process. It's just not a CCD, retina putting it back into a computer someplace. So the role of feedback and reputation and understanding of what's happening on the other side of the network, if you will, is really key. And this is another scale phenomenon. How do you scale that up? The eBay reputation model of intentionally tagging things and putting reputation points on it, if you will, I'm not sure is scalable, exponentially scalable, as say the Google model of scanning the haystack and looking for what it wants to find. So there has to be some combination of the intentional tagging that eBay uses and the inferential model, that statistical model that Google is using. I don't know the balance there. Maybe it's a combination of the two. And there might also be an editorial role of people analyzing what's happening and kind of synthesizing it intentionally through committees or standards bodies. Or one of the things I played with is pattern languages. Richard Gabriel's written a book on pattern languages and writers' workshops. Comes from the work of Christopher Alexander, the architect, talked about patterns of architecture and what gives vitality to a space. So this room, for example, has windows on two sides. It's a common pattern of Alexander. If we were in a room with only one-sided windows, it would kind of look cave-like and could be kind of depressing. So being in a corner with two windows is a nice pattern. So are there patterns of uplift that we can detect? Are there these kind of abstracted knowledge that you can frame in a pattern saying the dependency is, autonomy would be the pattern I want to talk about, but the notion of a pattern language is abstracted from all these activities. And so what is working? How do you do more of it? So micro loans are a pattern, if you will, that is caught a lot of attention and it is rapidly growing. Giving loans to poor women in villages that are cross-collateralized by, say, 6 women who then are all responsible for each other's success. So that's a very successful pattern, if you will. Are there other patterns that we could abstract? So you have a kind of a pattern language that would be manually abstracted from the activities. So that's this editorial role that would be beyond what an eBay or a Google type approach would do for it. So, have I exhausted the tape yet? I haven't worn out your tape, huh?
I think you've covered everything that I needed.
Okay.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to have an opportunity to talk. I have one more extension to Toasters and Cats. Would you want to hear that? Or yeah, it's actually a book that I'm writing, Toasters, Cats, and Snowflakes. So the extension, the toaster is something that's built. Cats are something that are grown. A snowflake is something that happens when the environment is right by lowering the temperature. So less energy in the atmosphere, you get more order and more diversity in the snowflakes than the higher temperature, which is really kind of profound. You've got these water molecules up there, and you lower the temperature, and you have order in snow and snowflakes. And you look at the snowflakes, and you have greater diversity. So I call that condensation. So toasters are built, cats are grown, and snowflakes condense. And this notion of creating an environment within which the good things will condense is really kind of an amazing process. And the web, in its sense, condensed from the initial conditions. And he created the space within which it fueled itself, and the more fuel it got, the bigger it got to fuel more people. So this condensing a virtuous circle in a space is a very interesting model for global transformation, if you will. How do you make the world a better place? By you create the conditions, you create the environment, and then you let things happen. And you don't need to know exactly what they're going to be, but you need to know that what happens is going to be self-evidently the right thing. So this notion of a snowflake or a snowstorm as a model of global transformation is very intriguing, and I think we've seen it happen with the web. We've seen Google come from nowhere to become a global phenomenon, eBay, Amazon, and there's a lot of these things that have happened recently of companies that maybe they knew about it, maybe they run the lottery, but they exploited the network effect to their benefit. I think that there's tremendous potential in getting smart people to think this thing through for a better world effect. And the kind of intelligence that's being applied to, the .com frenzy or the resurgence of it or whatever, could be applied to the better world stuff. It may not be a profitable activity. I'm in a position where I retired and I'm self-funded, so I don't need to derive income from what I'm doing. So I'm free to think of systems without the profit motive. I'm not against profit by any means, but there are probably many things that we need to do that are not driven by financial reward, but rather the self-interest, which I do think is necessary for a successful system, could be done through this personal sense of transformation, of helping. The same energy you see coming out of the hurricane of people wanting to help and do things. It's a very natural, normal human reaction, and to me, that's what's worthy of amplification. So maybe better world amplification instead of intelligence amplification. Not all intelligence is better worldly. But the snowflake model is, I think, probably the most fertile area to look at of creating this environment within which the good stuff will condense. Trust and reputation, as I said, is a key part of it. Creating the space or the environment with this autocatalytic property of kind of fostering the virtuous circle is another aspect to it. Creating the boundaries, the constraints, the edges of this network. And this may not be favored by the big players in the industry, in the same way as Ma Bell didn't like the internet coming along and doing the smart edges. The organizations that are thriving in the current model of fundraising and the hierarchical control structures probably are not going to be happy with this, disruptive technology that's coming up from the grassroots that is bypassing their wisdom and knowledge, and you're giving your money to those little garage shops instead of the big entities. So this isn't an idea that would be fueled through the industry. It would be probably seen as somewhat subversive or disruptive, if they even see it. I think one of the benefits that Tim had is that the big guys didn't even see his work. He didn't have to worry about competing with AOL or CompuServe. He was ridiculously underpowered for that. He just created his vision, made it work, and let the network dynamics come along, and AOL had to follow his lead. Well, it was no longer his lead by that time, of course. And it wasn't Tim's web, by the way, it was the World Wide Web, so it was a gift. He gave this technology to the world, if you will, and he took a very strong leadership role in the early days, but once it took off, it took off on its own, and he wasn't one of the dot-commer boom or bust type characters. He just kind of kept his eyes focused on the dynamics of the web, and eventually it took off without him, which is a sign of a good visionary, I guess. So I have a lot of respect for what Tim Berners-Lee did with the web and how he operationalized his vision and followed it through. So that's the snowflake story.